should be fine now.
Okay.
Excellent. So we are now live, both on our Facebook pages and on Zoom. It's 1 o'clock, the 17th of March, and it's another AZAPO session of political education. So my name is Thabiso Ngoni, and I am your replacement host, as Comrade Simpiwe Ashe is otherwise occupied. So today's discussion is a follow-on on the discussion that we had last week, where Comrade Mish Khalahutli also explored the issue of matric results and all the socio-economic issues that affect those. So today we're going to extend that conversation a bit more and look at the impact of matric results. The title for today is Impact of Matric Results, Reflective Narratives and Causes of Suicide. Helping us unpack and explore this topic is Ms. Kemoneilwe Momi Metsing. Ms. Metsing is a registered psychologist employed as the Chief Psychologist and Chief Education Specialist at Johannesburg North District of the Department of Education. She is also a part-time lecturer at UNISA and a Clinical Supervisor for Masters 1, first and second year and intern students in educational psychology at the University of Johannesburg. She forms part of a selection panel for the Masters in Education Psychology at the University of Johannesburg. She is currently serving as an executive secretary in the board of the Society of Educational Psychologists in South Africa, which falls under Psychological Society of South Africa. Prior to her psychology training, she was a primary school teacher for 12 years, subsequently becoming the head of department and then senior education specialist and the deputy chief education specialist, where she trained educators on aspects relating to learners with special needs, reading and neurodevelopmental disorders. Her focus is on school community therapeutic interventions, with the focus on creative expressive art therapy. Her interest lies in strategic constructivist therapeutics, interventions, and the utilization of impact therapy. Welcome, Momi, and thank you for joining us. As it's standard with these sessions, we will give you 20 to 30 minutes where you can present and share with us your thought. And thereafter, we will engage in a conversation, hopefully with everyone joining in, both on our Facebook pages and through Zoom. And I'll also have some questions to ask as we go along. So the floor is yours, as they usually say.
Good afternoon, Thabiso, and thank you for making it possible for me to share the little knowledge that I have with everybody in AZAPO. The topic of today, as you had said, it's a follow-up of what was presented yesterday, and but the aspect that I'm going to share with you, it's I'm going to divide it into two parts, as much as it's about matric results, but I also want to touch on the narratives and how do we reflect on these matric results that may create and be part of the possible causes of the suicide that we find ourselves in. So the first part that I want to talk about, Thabiso, and to just create a conversation, is that matric, as in grade 12, it's a journey that began, and I like to believe that the journey actually began in at conception. So when the child was conceived and the pregnancy went on, and the child started school in grade R, then went to grade 1, finally and ultimately the matric journey, I mean, it was reaching grade 12, which is the final year of schooling, formal schooling in the country. It's a journey of more than 12 years if we include grade R. And in this journey of matric, there have been some who have dropped and fell along the road to grade 12. it's very beautiful and very interesting on my side that the grade 12 results are somehow a measurement of success for, I'm not sure whether for the parents, for the learners, for the teachers, for everybody, and it's celebrated. But I want to be a little bit controversial and pose questions that I may not even have the answers to say, what about those that fell on the way towards grade 12? Is grade 12 the measurement of success? Is it fair to measure success with the results of the grade 12? Are the symbols that we get in grade 12 equate to success? Is it success in life that when you get a B symbol in grade 12, therefore it equates to success in life? The questions that I'm asking are, I want us to look at the context of how we find ourselves. And I'm not taking away the excitement that comes with the results of the grade 12. It's well and good. We need to celebrate success. We need to celebrate achievement. At the same time, we also need to balance with those that may have fallen on the road. With the grade 12 results, it was stated in the media that there were some learners, especially last year, where we found ourselves in a situation where COVID-19 came in, and without any notification, we just found ourselves in the middle of the COVID situation. COVID then actually heightened the disparities that the country has, and also elevated the disparities and the inequalities that are there in the education system. The inequalities are obviously reflected in the results of the IEB, which is a system of where private school would register the schools and they will get the results. And where we find in the public ordinary school, where they are recorded as the government schools, there is a decline in performance. As much as we celebrate, we should not overlook that there is a decline. But I don't also not want us to look at a decline also, but to reflect and say, what happened to those that dropped off and could not complete in 2020 because of various reasons of inequality, of context, of access that they found themselves in? How do we then look into those kind of things and try to salvage them so that at the end they can be able also to celebrate the little achievement and the little milestone that they would find themselves in? And with that, I am also thinking there is much more to life than to symbols. Yes, the symbols will equate the achievement and the performance that a particular child has, outdone themselves and has then showed themselves that they are particularly good in that particular subject. But having worked with learners who are of special need, who require special needs, and they may not necessarily have achieved grade 12, looking into the curriculum where their curriculum is not able for them to can reach grade 12. What are we saying about them? What are we saying about those that were not celebrated? What about those that either didn't succeed as they have expected to succeed or as they expected to succeed? What about those that didn't even succeed at all? How are we going then to make sure that we support them as a country, as a people, as a society, as a community, so that they can have that sense of pride also and be able to show some signs, some signs and signals that they have certainly achieved. We're living in an unequal society, and we should not necessarily overlook that aspect. The matric examination and the results comes with a lot of pressure, a lot of pride, a lot of happiness, a lot of excitement. And this is what we focus on, which is excitement, that which is being presented in the media. But there is this little side that is not even seen, which would lead me to the second part of the topic, which is how do we then have this narrative that is going on and reflect upon the narratives of the matric results and look into how they impact on the possible causes of suicide. I can just imagine if a child had intended or had that aspiration where in their mind they have worked so hard, they have put in a lot of effort, they have done all that they could within their power to can try and achieve in 2020. And unfortunately, they did not. What pressures would they find themselves in? What pressures from within themselves and what pressures from external sources are coming into play into all this? Remember, during the matric results, all the conversation, all the narratives, all the questions that are asked in that particular time is, how have you fared in your grade 12 results? Did you pass? And I am not certain where I'm sitting, whether we also accommodate those that did not try and make it. Are we in a position to can then release and relieve the pressure that comes with this excitement that is presented in the media? How do we then make sure that they feel that they are worthy, even though they have not succeeded, even though they have not achieved as much as they would have achieved? This can create a lot of a conflict within a person, and particularly a youth. Remember, at the age in matric is where, in terms of the developmental milestone, they are trying to just find themselves and find who they are. It's a point where in their developmental milestone, they are identifying their identity. They are realizing who they are, trying to find out. It's a trial and error issue. How do we then make sure that we support them and celebrate those that needs to be celebrated, at the same time balance with those that did not make it? And you can realize that with COVID and with the heightened inequalities that were presented to us in 2020, predominantly the less privileged are the ones that were hard hit, are the ones that were less counted, are the ones predominantly who would be have dropped out, are the ones who might not have achieved the way they would. And therefore, the pressures that comes with that within the family, within the extended family, within the community, how do we then salvage that so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where suicide is the only alternative to just conclude everything and end their life? This then brings me to the second part of the conversation, which is suicide. In most of the African cultures, suicide is a taboo subject. Death in general is a subject that we do not want to discuss. It's a subject that is very sensitive to almost everybody. And in the presentation that I always make is that where there is life, there's always going to be death. But somehow it becomes impossible or very challenging to equate that when you are born, you're going to die, let alone that you're going to possibly perish because of suicide. The context is becoming a little bit better now, and the narrative is becoming a little bit better with realization that suicide, even in the African communities, is now happening. I just want to cite a case that I can remember right now of a particular youth that I worked with who was in grade 12. And the first that we did was during therapy. In the therapy sessions, we could see that there is a lot of internal and external pressures. And the pressures were so much that even in therapy, when we tried to do what we could do, the external sources of a pressure were just too much. It went to a point where in the psychological space where you feel you have exhausted all possible, you then have to refer. And then I had to refer to the next level so that the intervention in terms of medication can then take on. And then that happened. But the external pressures in this youth were just too much to bear. And I want to bring this again to say, what are these causes of these suicidal tendencies that we find ourselves in, especially as African people? Our children, our youth right now are experiencing a different kind of pressures that we as adults did not experience. There is an element of bullying that is going on. There is cyberbullying. There is social media, and social media takes the bulk of the pressures that our kids find ourselves in. The question that we would then ask is, are we as parents equipped well enough to can be able to support our kids in terms of the external pressures that we find our kids in? We go out, we buy cell phones for them. And of course, there's a communication that we need to have. But how then do we make sure that we scaffold and give the right direction? Are we equipped enough? Are they equipped enough also as young people to can be able to sustain the pressures, especially even though you don't go outside, you are still inside, but because of technology, then you find the pressures coming in inside your house. How do we then, as parents, as support structures, make sure that our kids are supported in that part? And I want to jump into an aspect of the African myth in terms of suicide. Culturally, suicide is, and like I started, like a taboo. There are certain narratives that goes on what happens in the after death when a person has committed suicide. But also when the person has committed suicide, it comes with a lot of misunderstanding. It comes with a lot of perception. It comes with a lot of questions. It comes with a lot of shame and a lot of why questions that we cannot make. But I also want to link suicide also to the aspect that we need to look into and concentrate on before we can jump onto the suicide. as African, in terms of the mental health, how is mental health perceived? How is, and let me also maybe make mention of depression. How is a depressed person perceived? When I do my presentation, I always say, in my culture, Setswana, which is Setswana, there's only one word where you explain a learner with a disability or a learner with cognitive challenges. When you have cognitive challenges in English, you can have different levels, and you can have a mild and then severe. But in my language, which is Setswana, it's just one word. That also can bring about a possible challenge in terms of how do we then address the perception that we have about mental health, the perception that we have about depression. How do we then understand or misunderstand mental health? The perception of mental health, especially the treatment of depression, is a key aspect that would then somehow make sure that we prevent the pressures, we prevent the next level, which would be a depressive episode, which must be then diagnosed by a mental health practitioner to can say the person is clinically depressed. But before we go there, if there's these pressures brought by certain contextual factors, either internal and external, in terms of the grade 12 results, moving into a depressive mode, moving into an unhappiness, how do we then make sure that we intervene at that point before we find ourselves in the next part, which is the suicidal aspect, where most of the time it's all about regret. It's all about why. It's all about how could I have helped. It's all about, I wish this person could have told me. I would have done something. But before we reach that portion of suicidal thought or suicidal ideation, it is better to understand that mental health, including depression, is one aspect that can be controlled, is one aspect that can, through medication, be supported. It is therefore important that as African people, we then find ourselves and find a way in the space that we find ourselves so that we can then find a relevant person who can give the right advice in terms of medication, in terms of therapy, in terms of support, in terms of how we can prevent the suicidal thoughts. But I also want to go back and in conclusion to say, it is important to note that Matric is not the be it and all. Matric is the beginning of another journey of life. Matric and grade 12 is a stepping stone towards a beautiful journey of exploring, of experiencing, of a beautiful, beautiful journey of life with the support, with the right kind of support and the right kind of information, we will find ourselves in a better space as a people, as a family, and as a community. I would like to thank you.
So Thank you very much, Momi, for that presentation. I'm trying to turn on my video and it's giving me problems, but we will proceed until I fix the issue. So you both at the beginning of your presentation and at the end, you made two comments that I think are connected. At the beginning of your presentation, you said Matric is a journey that began at conception. And then you ended your presentation with the idea that, again, Matric is a beginning of another journey. Could you share with us your thoughts around the whole idea of Matric as a journey that began at conception? A lot of us focus on the results that we see at Matric, and I'm old enough to remember a time where we celebrated when you passed standard 1, we celebrated when you passed standard 4 to go to standard 5, we celebrated when you passed standard 7 to go to standard 8 and 9 and 10. So there were all these milestones that we celebrated along the way, and there were quite a number of exit points, JC and so forth, that you could still pursue a career even if you exited not having finished Matric. Can you talk to us a little bit about this whole idea of Matric as a journey that began at conception?
Thank you, Tabiso. I think it's important to note, and I really want to bring about, how do I put this? Why I say it's a journey of conception. When a parent, when a couple conceive and they are happy to get the news that they are expecting a child, it doesn't come to mind that the child might be a child who will, let me start, have a disability. It doesn't come to them that the child might be a child who will not complete Matric. It doesn't come to them as a child who will not be the beam of the family. And therefore, in this journey that starts at conception, as people, as parents, we try to do and give the best. Because we all, and it's a natural process, that we all want the best for our kids. But it is unfortunate that the best that we are trying to do in all these grades, including grade R, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3, up until grade 4, the elevated aspect, the elevated position where you will then have to ask what happens, it's only when we come to grade 12. But my focus and my point is, this is a journey that started a long time ago. This is a journey where we put in a lot of effort from the beginning. This is a journey that we constructed at the beginning of conception. And when we look at the inequalities that we find ourselves, you would then find that when you construct and you are worthy, you have wealth, you have everything, whatever that you construct with the material, with the resources that you have, when you start the process, would not be equal to a person who has or is less fortunate to have what we have. And therefore, this journey, even at the beginning, it's not a fair journey that we are starting here. As much as it's a race that we are taking all together, but we need to realize living in this country, there's always somebody who's always far, and there's always somebody who is behind. And therefore, when we measure which is, I think, I don't know, either it's success or what is it in grade 12, we need to contextualize and not only measure because of the symbols and not only measure because of the good things. There are some good that are also happening that may not necessarily be elevated in grade 12 in matric, which also needs to be celebrated to give and relieve the pressure, but also give courage. Because in my mind, achievement cannot be one focus. Achievement cannot be just in one box where a symbol equates success, a symbol equates the beauty. Beauty can be defined in so many different ways. For me, it's very important, Tabi, so that we look at all the other aspects, including, and I'm not diminishing, and I'm not trying to minimize the celebration that is there with the matric results, but I'm saying, let's try and just balance so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we are also not celebrating what needs to be celebrated, not elevating what needs to be elevated, therefore creating a pressure and creating a society where the disparities are elevated, the disparities are celebrated while minimizing what needs to be actually elevated.
No, excellent. As I said earlier, I'm having some technical issues with my camera. So we are going to proceed because I'm glad that your camera is working because you are the main attraction for today, not me. So don't mind if you don't see me, as long as you can hear me, that would be great. I think yourself and Comrade Mish highlighted the fact that these socioeconomic disparities influence the performance of learners, let's say in public school versus in private schools. So I am interested in learning as to, do we see the manifestation of those disparities also in the sort of suicide rate that we face? Are we seeing people or learners who are coming from more socially, let's say, depressed environments committing more acts of self-harm? And maybe we can also broaden this whole notion of suicide, because I think there are other acts of self-harm that maybe you can talk about that learners engaged in after having sort of experienced or achieved poor results at matric. So is there a correlation between the economic status that one is coming from and the suicide or cases of self-harm?
I do not have the stats with me here right now. I'm trying to get them. While I was preparing for the presentation, it has been documented that not many cases of suicide, especially in African countries, are recorded as suicide. And it's because of different reasons why they are not recorded as a suicide. And probably also, like you say, how do we then expand this suicide and talk about also self-harm, which is attributed to a suicidal ideation. The socio-economic status is in, how do I put this? Has an influence in also the recording of the suicidal cases in the country. But I like it when you say, how do we then expand this suicidal narrative and talk about self-harm that includes socio-economic status and psychological, psychosocial challenges. With the poorest and the disadvantaged communities, the self-harm can be seen in terms of self-destruction. How to then distract themselves. The case at hand and in my head right now is the utilization of the drugs. What I'm picking up which is now expanding and which has been on the rise is the self-cutting. It has, initially when the self-cutting started, it was predominantly not in the African culture, but lately it has risen and the numbers are increasing. When you utilize the drugs such to an extent that you really feel like you don't want to be here, it's slowly killing yourself to the extreme that you don't really want to be here. How do you then cope with life, cope with depression, cope with a lot of other things? And maybe, and in my mind, it would be difficult to then, on that point, decide to end the life at that particular point. The only way you can destroy and distract yourself is what is available at that particular point, which may be the utilization of drugs. They smoke quite a lot of drugs. They then self-cut for attention, and sometimes intentionally trying to commit suicide. And this is one of the many reasons that I've said before we reach that point where we have the suicidal, because of the pressures and the inequalities that we find ourselves in. There is a depressive mode that a particular person find themselves and they enter into that. And that's when we have to look into it as a society, as a community, so that the jumping on to the next level of self-harm, of self-destruction, and of suicidal ideation and suicidal thoughts, and successfully sometimes committing suicide, which is a very sad, sad story. We should not find ourselves there.
I like your framing and your use of the concept of journeys, both the beginning and the end of the journey, because I think it allows us to make interventions along the way and not wait until we see results at the end of the year and then be shocked that the results are either so good or so bad and so forth. Is there a common is there an understanding of matric as a journey, both in society at large and within the structures that make the various decisions? Is there such an understanding that conceptually we must think of it this way as opposed to one event? Or maybe let's speak about society in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am not certain where I'm sitting right now that the concept of a journey, a society has conceptualized that. For me, where I'm sitting, it's just about grade 12, and that's why it becomes a problem for me to say, if we are going to only focus on grade 12 and lose the whole part of the system, of the existence, then we have lost the battle itself. And I'll tell you why. In my experience, having worked with learners who are experiencing barriers to learning, and predominantly are those that are privileged, I find it very problematic that their journey from conception to where they ended, and predominantly is when they jump to high school, then they have to deviate. It's just lost across the system. Society just loses them. The system just loses them. They are not counted. They are the forgotten ones. Only those that reach matric are the ones that are counted. how do we then, as a system, as a country, want to celebrate those that have shown, and I'm not saying those do not have resilience, but those that have shown exceptional support and have exceeded expectation and have achieved grade 12. It cannot be right that the ones who have lost the system are completely forgotten. The ones who have not reached the grade 12 but have achieved in a different way, they are differently abled, are forgotten. It cannot be right. It cannot be right for just one sole measurement to be a symbol. And in my mind, and where I'm sitting, I am thinking, and there are stories out there, that a symbol does not necessarily equate success in life. And I will stop there.
Excellent. We have the guest, Comrade Mish Khalahutli, who was the guest last week. He's raised his hand. So, Comrade Mish, please go ahead. Tawa, can you hear me? I think the comrade is having some issues, or it could be my issues. Comrade Mish, can I ask you to type your questions, and then we will take it from there, from the text. Momi, you spoke about the whole notion of these children being under pressure. Now, I'm interested, if we were to take this notion that the meaning that a human being attributes to a certain act or certain actions and so on is a meaning that is derived from a dialogue between that individual and society. So ideas that society has influence, what meaning we ascribe to it. You also mentioned the fact that suicide is a taboo subject in African society. Given all of that, and I've seen a stat that says essentially that in teens between the ages of 15 and 24, suicide has become the second leading cause of death in South Africa, and is a fast growing trend. Now, here you have a society that sees this thing as taboo. However, it is number 2 from cause of death for the ages 15 to 24. In that meaning formation that we all go through, what has changed? Because I would have expected that if society sees these various ways of self-harm as being taboo, how then do these young people make this transition of from a taboo act and to committing the taboo act? What has happened in that meaning formation process?
So what's important is to note that, and which is something that I've said, that the youth of today are experiencing quite a lot of pressure, whether it's an internal one or an external one. And these are the pressures that as adults, as parents who are parenting them, might not have experienced them. I think as a society, we have a challenge that we need to address and face, and have this societal dialogue, that one of them is this one, that you're having a platform where we can then be able to negotiate and have a conversation about the societal construction. What is right in the eyes of the society? What is wrong? What is the definition of right? Who came up with the definition of this right thing? How do we then negotiate a space where both the parent and the youth especially can be able to negotiate their space and find a common ground? The dialogue needs to start. Our youth are under an enormous pressure. The enormous pressure, one of them, which it's a concern again, Tabiso, is that I'm going to bring in the matric results again and say we find our youth having attained beautiful symbols in grade 12. Then they jump to the tertiary institution. And if you look at the drop rate again in the tertiary, it's a little bit high. And in understanding that everybody who has been admitted in the higher institution will have attained good results in grade 12. Why then do we find high dropping rate in tertiary? It's because of all the pressures again that starts in this journey. Like I said, when you pass matric, it's a next step. It's another journey that now has started. Is this journey that the child and the youth are going to start? Are we ready for that? Have we as a society, as a community, deliberated, had a conversation about that kind of a conversation? It is sad when and the question that you ask is, how do we then find where there is the self-harm and all the society construct jumping into a suicide? It is all, and in my mind, the misunderstanding that is going on. It is the judgment. It is the, you will be okay. Just brush it off. Sometimes with the depression, it comes with chemical imbalances in the brain, and that has to be addressed. It is well and good to can brush it off at a particular point for a short period of time. However, it's important to go back and try and assess how then, where the child is. We have to have that kind of a dialogue with the youth. Find what is it we as parents, as a community, can find a common ground so that we can then eliminate and try to salvage these numbers of a suicidal ideation that is going on, and so that we can find a common ground and have a discussion and a dialogue.
Thank you. Comrade Mish has kindly typed out his question and comment. He writes, I agree with Osmo Me that using grade 12 as a yardstick for success puts a lot of pressure on our children, and they end up feeling worthless if they can't make it in class. Don't you think that we need psychological intervention at each level of their education? So that is his question.
Mtata Halukutli is completely so right. It's unfortunate that these are the constructs that we find ourselves in. And like I said, it's very unfortunate. And the psychological intervention that he is asking about are very important. And I'll explain why I'm saying they're important, Thabiso. I'm sure you would hear when I say it's a journey. The journey which starts with conception up until we find a grade 12. Look, psychological intervention to those that have access to it, they get it at an early age. Unfortunately, to those that are less fortunate, it becomes too expensive. If it does happen that they get it at the time where it's quite a little bit late if an intervention has to happen. It is important to understand that when we have to do an intervention as a psychological intervention, it's key and very imperative that it is done at an early age so that scaffolding can be done correctly, implemented correctly, and then you can make a follow-up, assess, reassess, and make another intervention. The difficulty that we find our country in is there are very limited psychologists who are available for the less privileged. From what I'm thinking and from where I'm sitting, and agreeing with Dr. Halukutli, this key psychological intervention needs to be made a priority. There needs to be advocacy of what mental health and what different psychological intervention it's all about. It's not about only correcting what has gone wrong. Sometimes it's all about looking at alternatives that are available. It's also about strengthening what has been there. But it's also about not finding the weakness, but finding the strength and emphasizing on the strength of a child for them to can succeed. So yes, indeed, psychological intervention at an early age should be prioritized, especially in this country, taking into consideration the history of the country. We've got a whole lot of things. We've got a whole lot of issues that are going on. We've got a whole lot of baggage that we have to deal with. Imagine having to deal with an orphan in grade 12, child-headed home. Who's doing grade 12? This child has a responsibility of looking after her younger or his younger kids. And he still has to do grade 12 and study. How will they balance that when there's a lot going on? What happens if they don't succeed? Or if they succeed not as per their expectation? How do we support them? That's why it's important, like Dr. Halukutli say, we need to celebrate each and every person because we've got a huge psychosocial challenges the country has with the history that we find ourselves in Dr. Tabis.
So there seems to be a sort of a theme that is developing both from your presentation and Comrade Halukutli's presentation of these socio-economic conditions that particularly affecting Black people in general. And that the system, it seems, is not at a point where it can make the necessary interventions throughout so that we can get the outcomes that we need. So I'm interested to find out as to what can parents, society as a whole, you spoke about scaffolding. What can we as society as a whole, given the failure that is there within the system, the inability of the system not to support these children, what can we as a society do to sort of fortify and build that scaffolding and give these learners some resilience that will allow them to be able to look at matric the same way that you've looked at it, that it is not the end of the world, but a beginning of another journey.
Thank you, Thabiso. You know, there's this, I don't know if it's a quote or, but it's a saying where in African culture, we used to say, my child is your child.
Yeah.
And that carried us throughout our journeys of life. As African people, as Black people especially, we need to reflect and make an assessment of what really went wrong I'm not sure what went wrong, but as we look at the system, we can see something is just not right. How do we support as a society? It goes back to that saying that my child is your child. My troubles are your troubles. My concern should be your concern. We are a community which has external support. We are fortunate that we have extended family. Some of us and some of the youth are also raised by grannies. So we have a huge support system. What we need to then focus is how, with the support system that we have, anchor that support and take out the judgment and take out the competition, but rather pull things and pull strings together as a community so that we can fight this one thing or get this one thing for all of us, which is success. As a society, I find that there is some cracks which can be corrected, of course, if we pull things together, because we have that. We have that. It's just a matter of conversations that we need to have, seeking assistance from one another, seeking support from one another. And so I need to bring you to the attention of how COVID actually, and in also, that's why I said I don't want to minimize the grade 12 results, but I want us to balance. In these grade 12 results that you also see, there were learners who suddenly, overnight, parents became teachers. And that has to be really recognized and acknowledged and appreciated that. With everything that came with COVID, it was just an overnight thing where we quickly had to learn and adjust and get skills that we did not know that we had. And parents had to quickly adjust and create a space for their kids, create a timetable. And this is what we as Africans are, the resilience that we have, that amidst all the challenges that we find ourselves, we still have this positivity. We still have this enthusiasm that we can pull strings together. We can get together and do what is right. And that's exactly that which we need to have to say. We find ourselves where we are losing our kids, either through self-harm, through drugs, through suicide, through whatever. How do we then, as a community, pull strings together? How do we negotiate this space and support each other and not compete, but compensate each other where there are certain weaknesses? It's all about being they call it Ubuntu. Let's bring that Ubuntu, Baruna, Borna Limon, and pull each other together and find the resources that we have and build on that and move forward.
No, you made a point of extended families and so forth. I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday, and then I was giving this friend of mine an example of a colleague of mine, Sisara. Sisara works, has to leave home, catch a bus at 4 a.m. to come to work and get here at 7:30, so that she can prepare for us who come in at 8. And she gets home at 1900 hours at 7 in the evening and so forth. So I was saying to this colleague that, COVID has also, this has exposed these socioeconomic disparities, because how can you expect Cesar to go home and then help in teaching the children? Cesara does not have access to Wi-Fi or to internet. So Cesara's children would suffer disproportionately so. And also what you were mentioning about these extended families. When people leave their homes to come and work in Gauteng, in all these metropoles, so as to end, they do not come with the grannies and you know, all the extended families. So you find that the infrastructure that would be there at home that would maybe even give these learners access to someone who can lend an ear and listen to them and help counsel them. You just don't find those. So when the system fails, it fails big time, because these socioeconomic disparities already put these people at disadvantage. So it's quite important that we need to sort of find ways to help our people build the scaffolding that you mentioned. I am inviting comrades, friends, and those who make comments. People can make comments on Facebook, on the AZAPO page, AZAPO Limpopo page, AZAPO Eastern Cape page, and the various pages of AZAPO on Facebook. They can make comments. We'll be able to fill them here. And colleagues can then also send their comments via Zoom. We have a question that is coming from Facebook. The question is also related to the discussion we've just had now about how do we empower adults and various people within the family so that they can help these learners essentially survive matric. The comrade is asking, one, what are the symptoms that we can look at and identify so as to first, as you said, be able to see that this person is potentially depressed and then seek out mental health practitioners who can then assist the individual. Are there specific signals that various people can then identify and then?
Yeah. There are signals that you need to look at to try and prevent the suicidal ideation and also successful suicide attempt. Firstly, I said there is a correlation between a depressed person and a suicidal person. So, for suicide to may happen, there can be a depressive episode that was not picked up. But at the same time, it can be a spur of a moment. So there are two separate issues that I need us to focus on. The spur of a moment, which can be an abrupt, quick, undecisive, erratic, on the spot. But in many instances, and research has shown that the symptoms of depression has started quite a long time. What we need to establish is that were there current or previous medical problems about a certain condition, but also how has the person been able to, how do I put it, to look well after themselves or not to look well after themselves. Initially, I said, it's when the depressive symptoms comes with a lot of anxiety, where a person doesn't feel like they are okay, and we sometimes brush it off. But there are also causes where the brain is also, there is an imbalance in the chemical imbalances, where suicide are caused by an underlying mental health disorders, which is one of them. I said it's depression or schizophrenia or bipolar. But if a mental health issue is suspected, the person should be, as a matter of agency, be referred to a mental health professional so that all those aspects that I mentioned can be excluded. But also we find that some other causes of suicidal ideation and suicidal are substance abuse. Misusing alcohol or drugs often contributes to the suicidal thoughts and the behavior. And if a substance use is an underlying problem, or an alcohol or a drug addiction is an underlying problem, firstly, we look at the rehabilitation program, which will be a package of how do we then scaffold and support the person. Some other causes might be associated with medication. The use of certain medication of prescriptive drugs, including antidepressants, may also increase the risk of suicide. But it's important that if there is such, a healthcare provider must be informed so that they can be able to review the medication that the person is currently taking to see if it is the one that is contributing. So what I really want to emphasize, besides the three things that I've spoken about, which are the causes and which are related to mental health, I spoke of depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar. Most of the time, and research has shown, and when I started, I said there's a link between depression and suicide, is to be aware of the depressive episode of a person. When they are low, there's a change in behavior. They don't normally do what they're supposed to be doing, which is they don't wake up in the morning. They don't look well after themselves as they used to. They are disinterested in things that they have been interested in. There's a social exclusion. They no longer want to be involved in other people. But there's also where they have a tendency of giving out things that they value, that is in preparation of them moving to the next session of a suicidal ideation, where they would give out valuable assets, materials of what they have. And that depression, of course, needs to be addressed and diagnosed by mental health practitioners. But this is not the end of it all, because there's treatment for that, Tabiso. Treatment of these underlying suicidal ideation, it all lies with the mental health practitioners. Yeah. We've got psychotherapy, we've got cognitive behavior therapy, we've got dialectical behavior therapy. There is a solution to all these problems. What we need to emphasize is that before it comes to where we find ourselves in, which is suicidal ideation, which is a very sad one, we need to have explored and exhausted all possible avenues that are available to us.
So thank you for that. I have another comment from Nontobeko Yawa, who's in the UK. She says, our problem starts with the imposed education system and standards alien to our culture. When we have the right people in government, we would need to set up a new curriculum that speaks to Black people's experiences and needs. The current system and poor training of teachers is failing our children. Also, learning needs to acknowledge that children learn in different ways as individuals, and we all develop at different stages. The point I am making is that the conditions we live under are creating mental challenges faced by our young. Nothing positive to live for. Nothing positive to live for. your take on Nontobeko's comment?
Nontobeko, indicates a very important aspect of the education system that somehow, to a certain point, creates challenges, because it's a one system of those that are excellent. The curriculum can become a barrier in itself. Besides the curriculum becoming a barrier, we find teachers who are not equipped to train and teach learners in different learners who learn differently. If we can work around that, where we address and look into the curriculum that incorporates and includes everybody, and appreciates and acknowledges everybody, but also acknowledges the challenges of the curriculum, which is a barrier, acknowledges the challenges of educators, which may also be a barrier of success. We are having a challenge, and we will not go where we have to go. Let me set an example. The curriculum has a pace, has a structure which needs to be followed. By this period of time, you need to have covered this. By this other period, you need to have covered this. We do not learn the same way. We do not run the same way. But it is expected that we become similar, and it cannot be. It cannot be right that we want a one stream thing for everybody. We can't fit all in one bundle. We learn differently. We have to accommodate all learners who learn differently. The curriculum has to accommodate learners who learn differently. If you are not going to do that, we will leave others outside the system.
No, excellent point taken. Talking about the pressure that is put on young people, I think part of that pressure is them thinking that there are no avenues except through matric. And one of the sad things is that the thinking is limited to just the matric pass, not even the types of subjects that people choose and what those subjects would allow them to do. I had said earlier that some of us are of the age group that where we can remember various exit points within the system that are before matric. I remember during my time, you need not have a matric. You could go to a technical college and do an N1, N2, N3, and then write your languages, 2 languages, and that would be equivalent to a matric. And then you can, if you want to proceed to a technical or university and so forth. And you could, because you've just done those 2 languages. Or you can just pursue a technical stream and become an apprentice and ultimately an artisan. Would sort of empowering learners with such information and just re-putting emphasis on those various avenues and just stating and emphasizing the fact that they have multiple options, would it help us in terms of dealing with this phenomena of self-harm?
It would greatly help, Thabiso. The constructs that are out there right now is that matric is the be-it and all. And if you do not have it, then you probably are doomed for failure. You said it correctly, that it seems like there are no other avenues for matric. And it goes back to what psychologists also do, which is career assessment. Usually career assessment needs to be done at grade 9, where learners are starting to choose subjects. You look at the learner, the interest of the learner, then you have to balance and look at the 3 other options. Unfortunately, with the system, with the lack and the few psychological mental health practitioners that are there, very few is known or very few know about career assessment, or very few have access to career assessment, so that it can be understood that even though you don't find matric, you don't have matric, you don't get those great symbols, it's not that it's the end of the road. I looked at the website for Australia. In many other countries, the priority is given to the skills. They require more skills, and the skills are taken into consideration and in high regards, in high regard. Unfortunately, I am not certain whether is it about stigmatization of the institutions that we had before, about people who are going to those technical institutions, or what really happened in between. And those technical institutions are no longer serving the purpose that they need to serve. As you can see, that there is nothing that has been said about them. It's only about the mainstream grade 12 that is being spoken about. It would be nice, and if we could then balance the two, like you say, to say there is this matric, but there is this other avenue that you can explore and still make a living and still succeed in life. And that's the conversation that we need to have as a society. It's about time that we raise the consciousness. We deconstruct whatever has been constructed, I don't know by who, and we reconstruct and find ourselves where we are supposed to find ourselves. But what's important, Tabiso, is to take back again the career assessment, have access to career assessment so that we can guide the youth properly.
Yeah. You know what you're mentioning about the constructs that are existing in society. I once had a young man, his mother brought him to me so that I could offer him some career advice. So in talking to him, I said to him, you know what, if you can go and do plumbing, do plumbing, do woodwork, do electrical, those are the things that will give you an income, whether you are employed or not employed, you will get an income. And his response to me was, I want to work with computers. And then I said to him, listen, you could buy your own computer and do whatever you want with your own computer. But I am telling you, me as someone who lives in this house and needs certain services and so on, I need a plumber. I need an electrician. I need someone who can help me with woodwork. I need someone who can help me with welding. And those skills are not dependent on someone employing you. But he insisted. He said, "No, I want to work, with a computer." And unfortunately, we have this phenomenon of these fly-by-night colleges. So he went and did some course on. They taught him MS Word, Excel, and so forth. And later on, and then he was telling me that he's struggling to find a job. I could not. There was nothing I could say to him. I just, shrugged my shoulders in defeat, as it were, because this is something that we could have known, but it's because of the construct that is there. That if you work with your hands, seemingly you are not intelligent, and sometimes working with your hands require more intelligence because you have to do all these, these tricky subjects like math, science, engineering, and and all of those things. So now we're heading towards the close of this session. And in part of your presentation, you mentioned the idea of advocacy. And that advocacy, I think, requires that all of us within society, we partake in it. So I'm interested in like a few steps or few things that you say should form that sort of, call it an agenda of advocacy. And I would say one of those is that our schools need to be resourced with more psychologists. What are the other items that you would put into that list of these items that we should all agitate for?
Okay. Thanks, Tabiso. You're right. Advocacy is very important, but how do we then go about advocating for that which we have been having conversation today with? I think we have these platforms that we are having as AZAPO. I really need to applaud you for having this kind of conversation and dialogues where we then engage and discuss issues that may sometimes be comfortable and sometimes uncomfortable conversation. We need to have this robust engagement where we deliberate and agree to disagree in a certain aspect that we don't see eye to eye. But at the end, we have to find a solution in the betterment of our youth. One important aspect that I'm thinking right now of my CAF is that psychoeducation is important. It's a critical aspect that sometimes can be minimized, and the worthy of it and the kind of outcome that comes out, that comes after a certain intervention of psychoeducation are something that is very unmeasurable. It's very big, huge, but we need to engage and have this psychoeducation with each other. We need, as a community, as a society, to take off the stigmatization of what you exactly just said, the conversation that you had with the young man, that they is sitting in an office with a computer. It's the best thing that can happen in life. There is so much. Life, it's not about what others think about you. It's about how you survive and navigate this journey again of life so that you succeed in your own way. Succeed is not a one stream. It's not based on metric. It's very broad, and we need to exploit through this advocacy, through the dialogues, through understanding, through negotiation. And I hope we will get there one day.
Excellent. I take those points. Just for those of us who are not in the field of psychology, can you tell us a little bit what you mean by psychoeducation?
Okay. Psychoeducation is discussing what psychology entails. We break down the aspects of what psychology is all about. For example, when I said it's not about dealing with negative or just mental issues only, it's also about educating parents on how, for example, to understand the developmental challenges that our youth find ourselves in. So it's educating it's educating the nation, the person, and the community on the psychological aspect, which is part of what a whole human being is all about.
Oh, okay. So we essentially we have an agenda, comrades, ladies and gentlemen who've all joined us. Momi has helped us sort of define an agenda for advocacy. I think one of the things she mentioned earlier on was that if, part of that advocacy agenda should entail that we should, as members of the society, insist that there be education psychologists available to schools in Black communities, And we should also insist that teachers be skilled, like Momi was doing, training teachers on all of these aspects. And we should also empower ourselves so that we are able to identify all the signals and symptoms that she identified, like a change in behavior, a lack of interest in things that the person was interested in, giving out things that they value. And as a society as a whole, we should try and do away with stigma that we attach to maybe someone who does not have a matric, and the sort of privileging or emphasizing matric as like the ultimate goal that anyone should aim for. So that is the agenda, comrades, ladies and gentlemen, that we should all go out and pursue and agitate around. Let's start off by giving those like Osmomi who are in the department, let's go and give them a bit of a challenge. Let's go and agitate and say, you people are in positions of authority. We need you to deliver. We need those psychological services within our schools, and hold them accountable, because the term civil servant has to have a meaning. You are there to serve us. Civil servants who must deliver. So I must thank you very much for spending this time with us. And unfortunately, you had to talk to a blank and a dark screen because of my technological challenges that I face. But I think you managed that with a certain level of resilience that is to be expected of a psychologist. And I must also indicate to all those who have joined us that Memo indicated to me that she came down with flu on Friday, and she was struggling with her voice and so on. And at some point she thought of cancelling and saying, let us postpone until she gets better. But in the spirit of being a true civil servant, she decided that she will bear it. She will grin and bear the suffering of having to deal with the symptoms of flu and making a presentation. So we thank you for that spirit of civil service and that spirit of contributing to our society. We hope we will have another session where I was intrigued in your bio where you say you use creative arts as a form of therapy. I hope one time we can have that session where we talk about things like drama, playing and dance and all of as tools for healing and dealing with issues. So thank you very much, as I said, for making time despite your health challenges. And thank you to everyone who has taken time to join us. And once again, apologies for the technical issues that I have had with the camera, but you did not need to see my ugly face. So thank you very much. Until next time, thank you for joining this AZAPO session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye.